and I'm sure my wife doesn't care how many beautiful women that I have love scenes with in the movies. She won't.
Did you come back and live here?
Oh, tomorrow.
Few figures from the 1980s embody a nation's spirit, like Paul Hogan, the laconic Australian comic who burst onto the world stage with a grin, a wide-brimmed hat, and a bowie knife. With 1986's Crocodile Dundee, Hogan didn't just create the iconic Mick Crocodile Dundee, he reshaped global perceptions of Australia itself. Already a household name at home, thanks to the Paul Hogan Show, it was the Bushman's hilarious culture clash in New York that made Hogan a global star.
The funnel web spider can kill a man in 8 seconds just by looking at him.
Now, decades later, and at age 85, Hogan has finally broken his silence on what really happened behind the scenes. What he reveals will surprise you. This is one story you don't want to miss. Rise to fame. Born on October 8, 1939 in Lightning Ridge, New South Wales, Hogan started out far from the limelight, working as a rigger on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. His transition into entertainment was almost accidental. In 1971, he wrote a humorous letter to the producers of the Nine Network's talent show New Faces, criticizing its quality and suggesting he could do better. The producers, amused, invited him on the show, expecting a comedic flop. Instead, Hogan delivered a spontaneous, off-the-cuff performance that immediately captured public attention. The Australian public responded to his natural timing, raw humor, and the everyman persona he embodied. This would become his trademark for years to come. The momentum from New Faces led to Hogan being offered a regular role on A Current Affair, where his comedic segments, poking fun at politicians, pop culture, and ordinary life became highly popular. By 1973, Hogan had launched The Paul Hogan Show, a sketch comedy series that he wrote and produced along with longtime collaborator and friend John Cornell. The show ran until 1984 and became a massive success in Australia. It also gained traction in the UK and parts of South Africa, making Hogan one of the few Australian comedians of his era with significant international visibility. While not yet a household name in the United States, Hogan had developed a style that was distinctly exportable. Then came 1984 and Hogan's transition into the global arena. He was recruited by the Australian Tourist Commission to star in a series of commercials aimed at boosting tourism from the United States. The campaign, crafted by the agency Mojo Advertising and funded with a budget of 3.6 million Australian dollars, featured Hogan inviting Americans to visit Australia with the now famous catchphrase, "Come and say g'day." And its punchline, "I'll slip an extra shrimp on the Barbie for you." Although Australians typically call the crustacean a prawn, the word shrimp was chosen for the American audience. The commercial aired heavily on U.S. television between 1984 and 1986, especially on cable and during major sporting events. The tourism campaign was extraordinarily successful. American tourism to Australia increased by 23% in the first year following the campaign, and by over 40% by the second. Hogan's face and voice were now instantly recognizable in the U.S., and he had become, effectively, the international face of Australia. He was a charismatic cultural ambassador. This wave of popularity set the stage for his career-defining project, Crocodile Dundee. Crocodile Dundee, production and global success. The concept was born from Hogan's experiences in the U.S. during the tourism campaign. He noticed that Americans were captivated by the Australian image he portrayed, yet most had little understanding of actual Australian life. Sensing an opportunity, Hogan teamed up once again with John Cornell and screenwriter Ken Shady to develop a screenplay. Drawing loosely on real-life outback figures like Rodney Ansell, a bushman who survived a crocodile attack and became a media sensation in 1977, the film reimagined the outback hero as a charismatic, knife-wielding survivalist with a heart of gold and a knack for misreading urban America. When Crocodile Dundee premiered in 1986, few could have predicted that a film written by three Australians, Paul Hogan, Ken Shady, and John Cornell, would go on to become one of the most successful comedies of the decade, earning over $328 million worldwide. With a modest budget of approximately $8.8 million, the film defied all industry expectations. Distributed by Hoyts in Australia and Paramount Pictures in the United States, it quickly became a box office juggernaut. It ultimately ranked as the second highest-grossing film in the United States for 1986, surpassed only by Top Gun. Its success was unprecedented for an Australian production, making it the most commercially successful Australian film at the time and one of the most profitable comedies of the 1980s globally. The story follows Michael J. Crocodile Dundee, a crocodile hunter from the Northern Territory who is brought to New York City by journalist Sue Charlton to experience American urban life. The character's charm, lack of guile, and outback resourcefulness provide the comedic tension as he navigates the bustling alien world of Manhattan. Paul Hogan, who co-wrote and starred in the film, played Dundee with a perfect mix of bravado and gentleness, while American actress Linda Kozlowski portrayed Sue Charlton. The chemistry between the two leads was not only compelling on screen, but would later lead to a real-life romance and marriage. More on that later. Filming took place in two starkly contrasting locations: Australia's rugged Northern Territory and the dense urban landscape of New York City. The outback scenes were shot in Kakadu National Park and around the small town of McKinley in Queensland, while the New York segments were filmed in iconic locations including Times Square, Central Park, and Fifth Avenue. The stark contrast between the two settings visually emphasized Dundee's culture shock and allowed for the classic fish-out-of-water comedy to shine. Many scenes in New York were shot guerrilla-style, using real passers-by who were unaware they were being filmed. Much of the film's humor relied on cultural misunderstandings and Hogan's portrayal of the laconic bushman thrown into sophisticated American society. However, beneath the comedy was a sharp commentary on modernity, masculinity, and cultural identity. The script, though seemingly light, was finely tuned to appeal to both Australian and international audiences, blending local flavor with universal themes of courage, decency, and innocence. Audiences around the world responded enthusiastically. The character of Mick Dundee rapidly evolved into a pop culture phenomenon. With his outback hat, leather vest, and signature bowie knife, Dundee was instantly recognizable. He embodied the rugged, self-sufficient masculinity that was highly appealing during the 1980s, a decade otherwise dominated by the high-tech slickness of Wall Street, neon fashion, and synthetic pop culture. Hogan's version of the Australian ochre was more refined than earlier portrayals, while he maintained the working-class accent, unpolished manners, and simple wisdom. He was also portrayed as inherently respectful, gallant, and adaptable. His authenticity, especially in comparison to the fast-talking, status-obsessed New Yorkers he encountered, made him deeply relatable to audiences across the globe. In Australia, the response to Crocodile Dundee was enthusiastic, if a little conflicted. While the film was celebrated for showcasing the Australian landscape, accent, and way of life to international audiences, some critics and cultural commentators were uneasy about its reinforcement of stereotypes. The ochre trope, associated with crude humor, anti-intellectualism, and exaggerated masculinity, was seen by some as a caricature that overshadowed the diversity and complexity of Australian identity. Nonetheless, the film's economic and cultural impact was undeniable. It put Australian cinema on the map in Hollywood and sparked a surge in international interest in Australian culture, slang, and tourism. Awards and critical acclaim followed. Paul Hogan won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy in 1987, and the film was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Although it lost the Oscar to Woody Allen's Hannah and Her Sisters, the nomination alone was a significant achievement for an Australian screenplay. The film also earned BAFTA nominations and took home several Australian Film Institute awards. The success of the first film naturally led to a sequel, Crocodile Dundee 2, released in 1986. 1988. Directed by John Cornell, the film continued the story of Mick and Sue, this time involving a kidnapping plot and a return to the Australian bush. While it was a commercial success, it received mixed critical reviews. Many felt that the freshness and originality of the first film were lost, with the sequel leaning more into action-adventure territory and relying heavily on formula rather than innovation. More than a decade later, in 2001, Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles attempted to revive the franchise, but it was widely panned by critics and underperformed at the box office. The film was seen as outdated, with its humor failing to resonate with modern audiences. Released in an era marked by rapidly evolving cultural sensibilities, it struggled to replicate the charm and relevance of its predecessors. The character of Mick Dundee, so beloved in the 1980s, now seemed like a relic of a different time. Despite the decline in critical favor over the sequels, the legacy of the original Crocodile Dundee remained intact. The character continued to be referenced in pop culture, from The Simpsons to Family Guy, and became an enduring symbol of Australian ruggedness and friendliness. In 2018, a fake trailer titled Dundee, The Son of a Legend Returns Home, was released as part of a Tourism Australia Super Bowl campaign, starring Danny McBride and Chris Hemsworth, and featuring Hogan in a cameo. Paul Hogan's creation of Crocodile Dundee was more than just a cinematic success. It gave Australia a face in the global imagination and opened the door for future Australian actors and filmmakers in Hollywood. It is a rare example of a film that defined an era, crossed continents, and turned a humble comedian from Sydney into an international legend. But was it all laughs and good times behind the scenes? A peek behind the scenes. The immense success of Crocodile Dundee was built not only on its fish-out-of-water storyline and Paul Hogan's charismatic performance, but also on a filming process filled with practical challenges, unexpected chemistry, and moments of real-life spontaneity. Shot across two drastically different environments, Australia's remote outback and the urban sprawl of New York City, the production had to navigate a wide range of logistical, technical, and creative obstacles. One of the most enduring off-screen stories to emerge from the film was the real-life romance between Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski. The two met on set in 1985 while filming in the Northern Territory and New York. Kozlowski, a Juilliard-trained actress from Fairfield, Connecticut, was relatively unknown at the time and had been cast to play Sue Charlton, the sophisticated American journalist who becomes captivated by Dundee's rustic charm. Their on-screen chemistry was palpable, lending a believable tenderness to the film's romantic arc. As filming progressed, that chemistry carried into real life. But there was a problem. You see, at the time, Hogan was still married to his first wife, Noeline Edwards, with whom he had 5 children. After divorcing Edwards, for the second time since the couple had previously divorced and remarried, Hogan married Kozlowski in 1990. The couple had one son, Chance Hogan, and remained together for 24 years before divorcing in 2014. While romance blossomed between the leads, the technical aspects of filming were far from idyllic. The outback sequences were filmed in Kakadu National Park and near the small town of McKinley, Queensland, where the extreme weather, rough terrain, and remote locations posed constant logistical challenges. Transporting crew, equipment, and supplies to these locations was no small feat. Infrastructure was minimal, communication was difficult, and temperatures could soar above 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet the production team was committed to authenticity, determined to capture the vast, rugged beauty of the Northern Territory that had inspired the character of Mick Dundee in the first place. One of the most memorable scenes in the film, the crocodile attack that cements Dundee's outback credentials, was particularly complex to film. Given the danger of working with real crocodiles, the production used animatronic models created by special effects supervisor Bob McCarran. These practical effects, which relied on hydraulics and mechanical rigs, had to be carefully synchronized with actor movement and camera angles. At the time, CGI technology was not yet widely accessible or affordable, so realism depended on physical craftsmanship and clever editing. Another iconic moment came in the form of the so-called buffalo scene, in which Mick Dundee calms a charging water buffalo by raising his hand and using what he calls his powers. The scene, humorous and mystical in tone, required almost an entire day to film. The buffalo, which was not a trained animal actor, proved wildly unpredictable. Multiple takes were ruined by the animal wandering off, reacting unexpectedly, or simply refusing to cooperate. Director Peter Feynman and the crew had to exhibit tremendous patience, using every trick in the book, including quiet surroundings, hidden handlers, and long lenses to eventually get the shot they needed. The result was one of the film's most memorable and quoted scenes, but it came at the cost of time, stress, and animal wrangling improvisation. Filming in New York City posed a different set of challenges. The contrast between the controlled, slow-paced environment of the outback and the frenetic, densely populated streets of Manhattan could not have been more pronounced. Many of the scenes in New York were shot guerrilla style. Hogan and Kozlowski would perform in front of real passers-by whose genuine reactions were captured on camera. Because the production didn't always obtain permits or shut down streets, filming required speed and discretion. Cameramen used hidden positions and telephoto lenses, and Hogan often stayed in character even when not filming to keep interactions natural. While this method brought a rawness and vitality to the final product, it also meant dealing with unforeseen interruptions, from traffic noise to crowds recognizing Hogan from his tourism ads. Some scenes had to be reshot multiple times, while others had to be cut altogether due to technical issues or crowd interference. In addition to environmental and logistical challenges, Hogan and the production team had to navigate differences in comedic sensibility between Australian and American audiences. To cater to a global market, two versions of the film were released. The Australian cut, which retained local slang and cultural references, and the international version, which translated some dialogue and removed idioms unfamiliar to overseas audiences. For example, the term Sheila was replaced with girl or woman, and a joke referencing walkabout was omitted. Behind the camera, tensions also flared up at times. Director Peter Feynman, who had worked with Hogan on The Paul Hogan Show, found himself balancing creative input from Hogan, John Cornell, and Paramount executives who were increasingly invested as the film's budget and expectations grew. Hogan, who was both the star and co-writer, maintained significant control over his character and the script, sometimes clashing with others over how scenes were handled. Yet, despite these challenges, the production team managed to work through disagreements, and Feynman would later praise Hogan's instincts and dedication to the project. Off the set, Hogan's sudden ascent to global fame brought new pressures. The actor was unaccustomed to the intense scrutiny and demands of international stardom. During the months following the film's release, Hogan was constantly in the media spotlight. Interviews, premieres, and award ceremonies dominated his schedule. He was praised for bringing authenticity back to comedy and for giving Australia a voice in the global entertainment industry. However, this newfound fame also exposed him to tabloid speculation, especially concerning his personal life. Speaking of speculation, Paul Hogan breaks silence on what really happened on the set. At the premiere of Crocodile Dundee, the encore cut, in Sydney's Royal Botanic Gardens on January 23, 2025, Paul Hogan, now 85, publicly confirmed that the film's notorious scene, where Mick Dundee gropes a trans woman in a New York bar, has been cut from the new 4K edition. In the original 1986 release, Mick grabs the person and proclaims, "That's a bloke!" and receives amused laughter from the in-film audience. The moment, played for comic effect at the time, has since been recontextualized as transphobic by modern standards. Hogan, who appeared in a wheelchair at the event but delivered several lively remarks, emphasized that the removal was not about woke culture, but rather about preserving the essence of Mick Dundee. a rough-around-the-edges bushman, not a predatory one. He stated, "It's not a matter of wokeness. Mick Dundee is outback. He wouldn't grope people." Hogan explained that he agreed with the cut after being told by others that this guy is a folk hero around the world and he shouldn't be groping people. According to director Peter Feynman, approximately 2.5 minutes of footage was removed. Not only the groping scene, but also other moments deemed sensitive, such as a sequence where Dundee mocks a limousine driver's heritage. These edits follow similar modifications made by UK broadcaster Channel 5, which cut the same scene before airing the film in a family-friendly slot on Boxing Day 2024, an edit that prompted viewer backlash for sacrificing iconic scenes, such as the famous knife-wielding subway moment. This decision marks a rare case of retroactive editing for ethical reasons, rather than purely marketing or censorial ones. Unlike typical remasters that adjust for quality or runtime, the encore cut involves the intentional removal of problematic content. Hogan reflected candidly on how times have changed and how humor once accepted may no longer be appropriate. He pointed out that at age 47 during the film's production, and now at 85, he sees Dundee in a different light. He joked, "I look like my own granddad when revisiting his younger self on screen." After all, jokes don't exist in a vacuum. They carry meaning that changes over time. Public reaction has been mixed. In Australia, some praised Hogan's mature stance and support for ethical editing, while others, including officials like Labour Communications Minister Claire O'Neill, warned against revising cultural heritage, calling Crocodile Dundee one of the greatest movies ever made, and cautioning against rewriting history. Meanwhile, internationally, the UK's edited airing saw a ratings bump, suggesting audiences may respond positively when outdated content is removed. Even within the production team, there were balanced views. Feynman acknowledged the need to navigate sensitive material, but cautioned that altering original art risks losing valuable cultural context about how societal values have evolved. The infamous scene, which once played as harmless 1980s humor, is now viewed through a contemporary lens as a depiction of assault and transphobia, prompting action from the original creators. But wait a minute, the controversies don't hear. In the 2000s, Paul Hogan became embroiled in a prolonged legal and financial dispute with the Australian Taxation Office, or ATO. The ATO alleged that Hogan had engaged in tax evasion by diverting millions of dollars earned from the global success of the Crocodile Dundee film series into offshore accounts and tax shelters. These allegations were part of a broader investigation known as Operation Wickenby, launched in 2004. The multi-agency probe targeted high-profile Australians suspected of using overseas tax havens, such as those in Switzerland and the Caribbean, to conceal earnings and avoid paying taxes domestically. The investigation brought intense media attention not only because of Hogan's fame, but also due to the large sums involved. Hogan had reportedly earned more than 100 million Australian dollars from the Dundee franchise, and authorities suspected a substantial portion had been kept away from Australian tax obligations. The pressure on Hogan intensified in 2010 when he returned to Australia to attend his mother's funeral and was subsequently served with a departure prohibition order, or DPO, preventing him from leaving the country. Hogan characterized the move as a deeply unfair attempt to publicly shame him, calling it an ambush and a disgrace. At the time, he told reporters he had paid all taxes due and labeled the investigation a politically motivated witch hunt. The DPO was lifted after several weeks, but the legal and financial wrangling continued for 2 more years. In 2012, Hogan reached an undisclosed settlement with the ATO. Though the terms remain confidential, what is known is that the agreement did not include any admission of guilt by Hogan. This settlement effectively ended a near-decade-long legal standoff, but questions about the public cost of the investigation and its outcomes lingered. Operation Wickenby reportedly cost taxpayers over 300 million Australian dollars and more than 1 billion Australian dollars in taxes and penalties being recouped. However, critics questioned whether such high-profile pursuits were always justified, especially in cases like Hogan's, where no wrongdoing was officially admitted. Hogan, for his part, frequently used press conferences and interviews to denounce the ATO, accusing the agency of harassment and overreach. He also criticized the Australian government for what he saw as a lack of due process. Amidst his ongoing legal and public battles, Hogan's personal life also underwent significant change. In 2014, he finalized his divorce from American actress Linda Kozlowski, whom he had married in 1990 after meeting her on the set of the original Crocodile Dundee film. The couple had one son, Chance, born in 1998. The dissolution of their 24-year marriage was described as amicable by both parties. There were no public accusations of wrongdoing, infidelity, or acrimony. Instead, the two cited lifestyle differences and the gradual divergence of interests and ambitions. While Hogan preferred to remain in Los Angeles, staying close to Hollywood circles, and his son, Kozlowski, stepped away from the spotlight and shifted her focus to private entrepreneurship, including a Morocco-based luxury travel business. Despite their split, both Hogan and Kozlowski expressed a commitment to co-parenting and maintaining a friendly relationship. The divorce was finalized quietly, with little media fanfare compared to the high-profile tax controversy Hogan had endured just 2 years earlier. However, the end of the marriage also signaled a broader turning point in Hogan's personal and professional life. With the legal battles behind him and his marriage concluded, Hogan entered a relatively quieter phase, rarely appearing in films or public forums. Still, he occasionally resurfaced for interviews or retrospectives, including a self-deprecating memoir titled The Tap-Dancing Knife Thrower. The memoir revisited key moments from his life, including his working-class beginnings as a rigger on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, his accidental rise to comedy stardom in the 1970s, and the global success of Crocodile Dundee in 1986, which at the time became the highest-grossing Australian film ever made. So, how is he now? Hogan publicly revealed that he had been suffering from muscle wasting tied to a disorder affecting his thymus gland. This organ, located in the upper chest, plays a crucial role in immune function and often shrinks with age. In Hogan's case, its deterioration led to alarming muscle loss, a weakened immune system, and the need for a pacemaker. He appeared increasingly frail in public, frequently accompanied by his son, Chance Hogan, who had assumed the role of his primary caregiver in recent years. Despite the medical challenges, Hogan continued to reside in Venice, Los Angeles, where he had lived since the late 1980s. Though America had been central to his professional and personal life, thanks to his Hollywood career and his marriage to Crocodile Dundee co-star Linda Kozlowski, Hogan began expressing a deep longing to return permanently to Australia. In a 2022 interview on the Australian morning show Sunrise, he spoke candidly about missing home and wanting to spend his final years back in his native land. However, his declining health, coupled with logistical issues and his son's American residency, made the transition difficult. At the same time, Hogan drew media attention for an open letter he wrote to the Venice City Council, in which he described feeling trapped and unsafe due to rising crime and homelessness in the area. Even as his public appearances became increasingly rare, Hogan remained a cherished figure in Australian pop culture. While his international fame had waned since its peak in the 1980s and 90s, Australians continued to regard him with affection. News about his health typically sparked an outpouring of sympathy and nostalgia. In popular memory, Hogan is still seen as a down-to-earth, good-humored everyman, emblematic of an older era of Australian entertainment when national identity was shaped as much by humor and ruggedness as by sophistication. Yet Hogan's cultural legacy is not without complexity. His most celebrated work, the original Crocodile Dundee, has come under renewed scrutiny recently. Critics and academics have reevaluated its portrayals of gender roles, indigenous characters, and various cultural stereotypes. What was once celebrated for its humor and uniqueness is now sometimes seen as perpetuating outdated views, particularly through scenes that rely on casual sexism or culturally insensitive jokes. This re-examination deepened when various TV networks and streaming platforms began quietly editing certain parts of the Crocodile Dundee films to remove homophobic jokes, racially stereotyped dialogue, or problematic portrayals. While some cultural commentators argued that these revisions were necessary to align with today's ethical standards, others raised concerns about historical sanitization. Hogan addressed these developments with characteristic humor and pragmatism, stating in interviews that comedy evolves with society and that the films reflected their time rather than malicious intent. Nonetheless, Crocodile Dundee remains a cornerstone of Australia's cultural export history. The film not only reshaped how Australia was viewed abroad, but also helped turbocharge tourism to the country. It romanticized the outback, celebrated the bushman archetype, and offered an appealing contrast to America's polished urban culture. With time, assessments of Hogan's work have become more nuanced. Academics studying masculinity, race, and national identity in media frequently cite Crocodile Dundee as both a trailblazer and a problematic artifact. While it opened global doors for Australian cinema, it also reinforced narrow stereotypes that later Australian filmmakers have worked to challenge or subvert. Still, Hogan's contributions cannot be dismissed. His ability to connect with audiences across continents and his role in shaping how Australia was imagined internationally remain significant cultural achievements. In recent interviews, Hogan has shown an awareness of how fame has evolved and how he fits into that changing landscape. He has said he never chased stardom and was always more interested in making people laugh than in building a celebrity empire. His refusal to fully embrace Hollywood glamour, along with his minimalist lifestyle, has preserved his image as someone relatable and grounded, even after decades abroad. While his filmography has slowed considerably, after all, his last notable roles were in Charlie and Boots in 2009 and the very excellent Mr. Dundee in 2020. His persona continues to resonate. Today, Hogan's fragile health limits his visibility, but his cultural imprint remains indelible. He represents an era, a type of humor, and a national character that many still hold dear, even as conversations around representation and ethics continue to evolve. Whether remembered as a trailblazer, a relic, or a symbol of an older Australia, Paul Hogan has earned a lasting place in the annals of entertainment history. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.